My chance new go watch made in China. We play ping pong ball made in China.
Hello and welcome to China Econ Talk. I'm Jordan Schneider here with Max Zhou, otherwise known as Zhou, who was the former head of mobile at Mobike, currently a co-founder at Meta App. So Max, thanks so much and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Before we jump into your experience in the China tech scene, if you could maybe walk yourself a little through your educational background and how that sort of framed your start in this world.
Yeah, so I spent my first 18 years in China. Went to undergrad in China until I transferred over to Purdue. And finished my undergrad at Purdue, and then finished grad school at Yale, and then I went over to work in Silicon Valley, spent 3 years in San Francisco, and then there I was working at Uber until a bunch of Uber people came over to work at Chinese startups, and that's how I joined Mobike.
Sure. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about your decision to start studying the West in the first place. What drove you there?
I think it's the best choice for people who are interested in technology, especially right now when you look at all the top tier CS programs, they're all pretty much based in the US, and then obviously they're Silicon Valley. So studying in the US gives you an easy access to a working visa and starting your career in Silicon Valley. I didn't even imagine me starting a company in China, but here I am. So
sure. So let's talk then about the decision to move back to China and what prompted that.
It's really the rapid growth of Chinese tech startups, and I was. I regularly come back to Beijing and visit, and 2 years ago there's really no bikes, and I mean 4 years ago there's no Didi, there's no Uber in China, but then everything started so quickly, and it just quickly grew and became billion-dollar businesses. So when I saw the opportunity at Mobike, I thought about it, and I came back to talk to my former coworkers at Uber, and also the CTO at Mobike, and his name is Zhou, and Zhou basically asked me, do you want to come over and run this mobile apps team, and we're spending 1 billion RMB this year through the app. I'm like, oh, that's interesting, and I looked at the downloading ranking on App Store of that app. It's at the time was ranking top 3 on the overall gross download in all categories. And I was so excited. I was like, wow, this is 1 billion RMB, and then this is a top downloaded app, and we're spending so much to really get this phenomenon continuing and becoming a later stage company. So that's why I chose to come back.
Sure. So before we dive into the details of bike sharing in China, could you walk us through the sort of Uber Mafia, which has seemed to have had a really remarkable run of successes and new startups? But what is it about this experience at Uber for a lot of Chinese nationals that you think has helped them expand their horizons or think bigger?
What really happened here is Uber, mostly Travis, he brought over to China his whole entrepreneurial spirit and management style. Very famously, there's this strategy of deploying bankers and consultants as city managers to Uber's each city, and there's like a 3-person strike team on each city, which proved to be really effective.
What does that mean?
So he basically hires 3 bankers and to manage each city, and all the other person are interns and contractors. Mm-hmm. So highly effective, highly self-disciplined people running a pretty large business. So basically divides the whole business big pie into small slices and assign it to effective individuals. And this proved to be a pretty good strategy, and the strategy managed to gather a lot of these like-minded people over to Uber China. And so when Uber got acquired later on by Didi, a lot of these people stayed in the Chinese tech startup scene, and they are they're really like outsiders before because they were bankers and consultants, but now they're tech people, and this proved to be a better battleground for them. And that's where you see Davis Wang. He was Uber Shanghai's general manager. He became the CEO of Mobike, and then Zhang Yanqi, he was regional general manager at Uber China, and he became the chief operating officer at Ofo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, there's also a downside of the Travis Kalanick mindset. Obviously, he's no longer running Uber. So, how do you think that sort of attitude plays in the Chinese market?
Well, I think his whole the feeling of Travis stays, right, and the whole education he gave to this market proved to be invaluable, and especially people would argue, I would argue that Travis is better suited to be a Chinese startup founder versus a Silicon Valley one, because people will challenge his what's it called? His 道德, as in his moral standards,
sure,
kind of, but that's not a problem here in China. So and if anything, people want to learn from him to be fierce and ruthless, and even get better at fierceness and ruthlessness.
So maybe this is his next move, is to show up here for whatever he's got cooking up next. Let's turn now to the bike sharing industry. Yeah. So just for a background for all our listeners out there who maybe haven't been to China recently or haven't had these bikes expand to your cities, you use your phone to walk around and unlock any bike or bikes of these companies that are on the streets. And the idea being that these bikes are so prevalent, you can sort of walk 10 meters in any direction and you're going to find one, that it makes not having a bike be worthwhile, and people who would take cars or ride the bus for an extra 2 stops end up doing bikes just because they're more convenient and they're always there. So Max, why don't you start us off with a bit of how the industry has evolved over the past, 2 years, 3 years now?
Yeah. So at first, this was just a experiment sort of in Chinese cities to see if bike sharing can work and if people are respectful enough to not steal these bikes at first. But later on, right now, bike sharing in China became so big that in a lot of cities, including Beijing and Shanghai, bikes has become the number 2, or shared bikes has become number 2 transportation methods in terms of number of trips done every day. To give you some number, in the entire Chinese market, Mobike and Ofo combined are doing around 30-40 million trips per day, which is 5 times what Uber is doing globally.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what does it take to build and improve the mobile app of Mobike, and how has that evolved in particular?
We were mostly using the mobile app to be a tool for us to gain popularity and to do a lot of peer-to-peer referral and play a lot of these operational games so that more people are interested in riding a Mobike to get people on board. For example, we created products like Red Packet Bikes, which we put a bounty on lesser frequently used bikes, so that when people ride a bike in weird locations, they can get a little bit of money for that. And so this has proved to be very, very effective. And the other thing, interestingly, is that it's the launch of WeChat Mini program, which is a very easy and how do we call it, very quick kind of format. People are using WeChat to ride a Mobike and an Ofo more and more.
Sure. So what does that mean for the business if people are going through WeChat as opposed to using the Mobike app itself?
Apparently, it's better for Tencent rather than for each individual businesses. But if it's more convenient, users are going to choose the convenient method regardless of businesses' priorities. So it really hinders Mobike, as Mobike is trying to go into the taxi industry, the ride-sharing industry, and it recently deployed carpooling and also limo cars on the mobile app. But since 30-40% of users are riding a Mobike through WeChat, it becomes a bigger and bigger problem over time.
How so? Because Tencent can stop Mobike from using this sort of feature within it?
Because WeChat Mini program now really is not a all-around kind of tool. It doesn't stay on your screen, right? It only opens on specific scenarios. So when you scan a Mobike, it opens the Mobike WeChat Mini program. Mm-hmm. But then Mobike as a company wants you to have the app on your home screen, so that when you're trying to ride a limo, you still use the app. Yeah. Right. So WeChat limits the company's imaginations, or the capital markets imagination for the company.
Sure. That must have been, WeChat Mini programs showed up when you were working there. Yeah. Right. So this was definitely an unexpected development on your part. You had to navigate.
Yeah. Well, it's been very good at the other hand, which is WeChat Mini program managed to greatly broaden the funnel for new registrations. So people no longer need to wait in the coldness and download a 40-50 megabyte app and then do installation and registration, blah, blah. With WeChat, WeChat can port over the name and phone number and all the payment methods within the mini program. Sure. Things are a lot easier.
So there's been some talk recently about the deposits not necessarily being sealed off. Do you have any sense of how that's playing out internally, where the money's sitting?
So it's always been pretty much like a top secret, and people can't really talk about it. Mm-hmm. But from what I gathered, apparently some of the deposit has to be is deployed for operational and bike manufacturing costs. Mm-hmm. And it makes sense because when you're sitting on 100, it's actually 10 billion RMB mm-hmm. Worth of deposits, then it makes no sense to just leave it as a bank deposit, right? So sure. As long as when the storm comes, you still have some cushion, that's good enough.
Sure. So what do you think are the main risks to this model, particularly in China?
Well, I think it comes to the part when does these companies qualify as too big to fail? Mm-hmm. If they are, then maybe it's fine. Because when it comes to these sort of banking kind of infrastructure, people's trust in the brand, in the company, makes a lot of difference. And when the government is sort of endorsing and backing these two top players, then it shouldn't be a huge problem.
In that any bank run of sorts on people's deposits, the government will say no. we'll end up insuring this sort of thing.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about who's investing in these companies and why.
So essentially, all the top players pick a side. So Mobike side, at the beginning, it was Panda Capital. It was Li Bin, who is the founder of Weilai Automobile, and later on they brought on Sequoia Capital, Sequoia China, and then Warburg Pincus, and then Tencent, and then Temasek. So a lot of these top players, and Hill House Capital, which is also very big.
Sure.
And also at the beginning it was Li Kaifu's Sino work. And on the OFO side, it was at first it was Jin Shajiang, GSR Capital, and then later on they brought on Zhen Fund, Jingwei, and later on they have Alibaba, and mostly Didi backing that.
Sure. So what are the sort of, aside from the VCs who are just there to make a lot of money, what are the strategic interests of the the bats who are investing in these bike shares?
Didi is the most. This bike sharing thing is mostly in Didi's face, right? Mm-hmm. Didi's number of trips in Beijing has reduced for trips that are less than 5 kilometers has reduced by almost 40% because of the introduction of bike sharing.
That's remarkable. Yeah. That's really something else.
Yeah. So people chose to ride a bike instead. And so they had to really, really control a company. And that's what they did. They right now, I think they own almost 25% of OFO. And because of that, they also have board seats, and they assigned. The funny thing is, I previously mentioned Zhang Yanqi being the CEO of OFO. Supposedly, he should be the head of all operations. Mm-hmm. But then Didi, after they have sort of voting rights at OFO, they moved over a vice president to become the executive president of OFO, overseeing operations over the CEO of OFO, which is kind of funny.
Sure.
But recently, I think beginning of this month, these three people Didi assigned over no longer works at OFO, which is like what happened there. And on the other side, Tencent has more or less the same power over Mobike, and it's been a pretty happy marriage between the two companies, as in WeChat mini program became more and more popular, and it was mutually beneficial for the two companies. Also, the payment methods helps WeChat as well. More importantly, WeChat or Tencent wants to have this sort of called contextual program and payment behavior, so that they can gather more of these offline 线下流量, if you will.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about your thoughts on global expansion for these companies, and to what extent they're taking it seriously, and what challenges you expect them to encounter along the way.
So there are two reasons these companies are trying to go global. The first is having the ability to go global increases the company's valuation 2 times probably, and that's the biggest reason. And the second reason is the market has already been saturated in China. There's almost 200 cities that these companies have deployed their bikes in, and you really can't go further, because if you go to a very small town, then bikes will get stolen and it's gone, right? Mm-hmm. So further growth can only be seen in international cities. But then when you look at what are the cities that you can deploy these bikes, when you think about it, there are a few cities that are good for it, but most of the cities are not so good for it. Mm-hmm. The good cities are cities that already have a biking culture, things like cities like Amsterdam. But a lot of the American cities are not so good for bike sharing.
Sure.
Because let's say in California,
it's just too spread out. Hills.
91% of all the trips are done by private vehicles. People really, really drive, right? And the cities are not designed for bikes except for New York City. And then existing bike sharing, non-smart bike sharing kind of company like City Bike, they already have like the dominate control over the market. And when you are trying to come in, like Blue Go Go did back in June this year, they went into San Francisco with 500 bikes, and the city council was so angry, and they essentially banned all the newcomers from coming in.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because you really need an already halfway decent public transportation system because, if you need to get 10 miles to work, you're going to drive, regardless of whether or not there are bikes there. And while it may be a fun novelty, you're not going to be using it every day unless it really impacts your commute or how you get to school or how you visit your relatives or family. So there aren't quite as many places as you may at first glance think that these companies can really expand to.
The bigger challenge is mostly talent and corporate structure. As American companies fail to see big success in China, Chinese companies have a harder time to do it, mostly because when these business leaders, they're inexperienced in American or European markets, when they're making orders, especially in this heavily operation-heavy industry, how can you set up a effective rule so that people don't embezzle money from you and do a good job?
Yeah. No, it's a real challenge. So let's talk about the merger rumors, why it may or may not make sense, and what it would mean for the two firms and the industry at large.
So when you look at per trip gross income right now, because of the competition, each trip ends up being 20 cents RMB for each company, essentially, which is so low that they can't really survive. But then let's do a little bit of imagination. If they do merge, will the gross income come up to 1 RMB? I would argue it's still a no. It could probably, if the merger was successful and they really, really don't compete, the gross income can probably come up to 80 cents RMB. And with a bike turnover of 4 to 6 rides per day per bike, then it kind of breaks even. But that's a very happy scenario for both companies, and I don't think that can happen. So my understanding is, even if the two companies merge, they're going to run out of money. They're not going to get profitable. So the scenario that I see is Meituan controlling Mobike, and then
Meituan being a
Meituan is the Uber Eats of China, and it's essentially Grubhub and Uber Eats and everything combined. So Meituan and Dianping is a very big company. They're valued at $40 billion right now, and so they also, the CEO of Meituan, Wang Xing, was a early investor in Mobike, which makes them really close. And Didi might then gain controlling interest in Ofo. So
what would Meituan want with Mobike?
First, Meituan right now is trying to go into the ride-sharing market, and in order to go into the ride-sharing market, having a bike-sharing company really helps. You have an enormous amount of people opening the app trying to go from point A to point B, and if you offer them very cheap ride-sharing service, they might take it. That's the logic behind it.
So it's sort of like an upsell Like you think there's a bike, but maybe it's not too close or it's a little too cold. You're feeling lazy that day.
Exactly.
And then it says, hey, we can get your car in 3 minutes. And so you end up, taking that 40% decline that Didi has seen in those short rides and bringing that down to 30 or 20%. Exactly. And then being able to make money. So it's really, so your vision really then is the idea that the Mobike's value for these companies is just like as an app that people can open, and maybe with some cool data that they can find about, flow patterns around the city or what have you.
So Mobike's really the two biggest areas that Mobike can be profitable. So like I said, Mobike by itself or even through a merger with Ofo can't be profitable. The only two ways that it can be profitable is one, going to the ride-sharing market, and two, tapping into the delivery market. So that's what Meituan is doing, and that's what Meituan wants to do in ride-sharing.
So can you explain how the delivery market ties into bike sharing?
So another thing that I didn't mention is bike sharing also reduced food delivery market size because people, instead of choosing to order in, they, with a bike in their front door, they decide to go and dine in those restaurants. Okay. So that's actually a very weird combination of people's mind, and they can choose either way. Yeah. And so with the bikes available, people's range in their neighborhood increased from probably less than a mile to over 2 miles, and that's when Mobike can basically intercept some of the delivery market or delivery traffic to deploy these people to discounted local restaurants.
So basically, this is very funny. So the idea is that the only way Mobike and Ofo can make money is sort of by going against their central mission to get people biking more. So you open the app and instead of actually biking, you decide to not bike.
No. You decide to not bike instead of, and then ride a Uber.
Yeah. Actually. Or you decide to not bike and just get food delivery.
No. You decide to bike, but instead of ordering food delivery, you bike over to the restaurant and dine in.
Oh, okay. So the Mobike app then functions as like a funnel for the nearby restaurants. Exactly. That the restaurants can then advertise on the app saying, here's a bike, we can reserve it for you, it'll be there, we promise, and then you'll be able to use it to get to our place, and we have a 5% discount for anyone who shows up with their own Mobike or something.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. I don't know. I'd invest in that. I like that. That's like still with the good vibes, I guess.
So that's why Meituan is a very good candidate for acquiring or controlling interest in Mobike. And apparently Didi has already controlled Ofo, and they have a board seat, and they're gonna block Mobike from merging with Ofo, because if they do merge, Didi loses the controlling interest in both of these bike sharing companies. And they can't afford to have that.
So what else is the world missing when it comes to dynamics in this space?
It's funny is how all the PR is going, and so many weird PR articles are coming out. First they say Ofo leadership is embezzling money, and they're saying that they're very luxurious. They fly on first class and then buy fancy apartments, and also they're saying Ofo's blowing their deposit so that they only have 300 million left. Yeah. And money is all gone until you have to withdraw the deposit. But where does this news come from? It's really funny when you think about it. Who writes these articles? Yeah. The media? Sure, but who is pushing for the media to write these articles? Mobike? No, because Mobike don't want people to withdraw their deposits either, right? And who else is doing this? Apparently, it's the early investors.
All right, tease out this. Emo. Yeah. Let's get the emo. Let's get the emo. Let's get the full. Let's play it out in full for us. Okay, so why are the early investors in your
my tinfoil hat
in your tinfoil
format
the ones who are trying to push these negative stories about these companies?
Early investors really want to see these companies to merge, but later investors, including Didi, don't. And these companies by themselves don't really want to merge either. And so these companies are trying to hang on and raise more money from new investors. But early investors are like, we want out. We want these companies to merge and go public, or really turn a profit. But they can't do it. They no longer have controlling interest in the company. So what they do is they push negative stories, and these stories makes no sense for either side, or for later investors, or for the general public. But the only benefits early investors like Zhou Xiaohu.
All right. Well, let's see if that turns out to be the case. Any other crackpot theories on this world?
No, that's it.
Okay, great. Well, I think we've definitely gotten our money's worth here. Let's talk a little bit about your new project and what the initial gap was in the market that your new app is trying to fill.
What really is happening today on the app market is people no longer download new apps. So for last year, people downloaded when you subtract uninstalls, people installed less than one app per person.
Annually.
Annually.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's something else.
So the net increase of apps is definitely slowing down. So how can we? But apparently, on the other side, on the content provider side, more and more developers are pushing new contents on the App Store. So there's a imbalance here, right? These new developers, especially game developers, find a very hard time pushing their app to their games to app users, right? So what they do is they pay a large amount of money to channels, to distributors like Tencent, like Facebook, right? So I see a huge gap here. And the reason why people don't download new apps and people don't install new apps is because it's a hassle. You have to wait for a while for it to download, and after you do install it, it keeps pushing you notifications of weird stuff, and you end up don't like the game and you delete it. Right?
Yeah, particularly with these Chinese apps, the Chinese gaming apps that are growing in sophistication. I mean, Wanzhong Yao, what is I've downloaded games that are over a gig. And on the one hand, it's fantastic because the amount of content and complexity that these Chinese games like the Chiji knockoffs, the Player Battlegrounds knockoffs are unbelievable. Wanzhong Yao, King's Glory, which is going to be launching in the US at some point, they said September, maybe now in February, is really a level of sophistication above what's on American app stores. But at the same time, these programs are a lot larger, and if you're hitting up against your gigabyte ceiling, having to clear 500 megabytes just to download an app you haven't ever used before is a real hassle and must be a real challenge for these developers.
Another side is videos. With more and more understanding of intellectual property, people can no longer, or content providers can no longer just pirate stuff. And in order to watch most of the videos on Chinese internet today, you have to download essentially 10 different video watching apps like Tencent Video, iQIYI Video, etc.
Yeah, it's a much less consolidated market within the U.S. with basically Uber, Netflix. I mean, YouTube, Netflix, and like maybe Hulu if you're adventurous.
Yeah, but so that's another problem that I see. So what I did is we created this app called Meta app, and it morphs into any app pages. So you no longer need to download the entire app package. Instead, you open let's say you want a video. You're gonna watch like a movie today, and so this movie is only available on iQIYI. So I opened the iQIYI native video playing page for you. without you downloading iQIYI. And if you want to play a game, you want to play the first few minutes of the game, I stream down the first few minutes instead of you downloading the entire game. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm doing right now. So essentially, WeChat mini program is a fast in time kind of streaming of tools, I would say, and it gives you mini tools just in time. What I'm doing is I give you entertainment content just in time.
Sure. No, I mean, what the WeChat mini apps I find frustrating because they are so limited. But having to have this, getting the solution of the full feature could be really interesting, and look at you maybe end up saving Mobike's butt from from outside by giving the power back to these actual independent companies who are trying to not have to live and die through the Tencent ecosystem. So what have been the challenges you face so far, and what are you and how are you hoping to publicize this, or what's the next step for the app?
Next step for the app is we are still in the process of polishing and figuring out the best product so that we have product market fit. So before that, we don't want to spend any money on acquiring users. We want to make sure that it's good before we start expanding.
Sure. Well, I'm looking forward to not having to download games or videos ever again. Max, this was such a pleasure. Where can folks find you?
People can find me on maxwellzhou.com or on LinkedIn and Facebook. So.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. Looking forward to having you on again. And thanks so much for speaking openly. It's always fun to talk to the ex-employees and the ex-diplomats and the ex-officials, because then you get the good stuff.
我的脸皮最厚，啤酒喝不够，爱吃肉，其实喝多了我也难受。饭后百步走，665道口。